right, turning it off and on again actually did the trick this time, so we are good to go, Mr. Deputy Ward.
Excellent. Thank you, Rob, and good morning to all on our council and committee of the whole meetings here on February 13th. So I'll call the meeting to order. I would welcome everyone to join me in the singing of O Canada.
O Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all of us command. With glowing hearts we see thee rise, the true north strong and free. From far and wide, O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God keep our land glorious and free. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
Thank you. And Councillor Scott, Councillor Scott, that didn't sound half bad. Well done. Okay, Madam Clerk, could you take the roll call, please?
Thank you and good morning, everyone. I'm just confirming that we have all members in attendance today with the exception of Councillors Pringle and Warden Matrosovs, and Councillor Hope is attending in her place today. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Tara, and welcome to Councillor Hope. Before we begin this morning, I want to respectfully acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe Nation, the people of the Three Fires, known as the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi nations. And further, we give thanks to the Chippewas of Saugeen and the Chippewas of Nawash, known collectively as the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, the traditional keepers of these lands and waters since time immemorial. To our south lies the traditional territories of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Six Nations of the Grand River. We are dedicated to honoring Indigenous history and culture and committed to moving forward in the spirit of truth, reconciliation, and friendship with all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. Is there any declaration of interest related to any matter on today's agenda? Seeing none, if one should arise, of course, you can declare it at any time. We have a couple sets of minutes here for adoption. First is the County Council and Committee of the Whole minutes related to January 23rd. Someone care to move those minutes, please? Move adoption. Councillor Eccles, second by Councillor DeBreen. Any discussion? All those in favor? I guess I'm a little rusty. I should have asked, is anyone opposed to those minutes? Not seeing any, they are carried. Any closed, well, we have no closed meeting matters unless somebody is requesting one. No, not seeing any. We have a set of minutes here from the Board of Health. Someone care to move adoption of those or receive those minutes? Councillor Hutchison, seconded by Councillor Bordignon. Any discussion? All those, anyone opposing? Councillor, or rather, Madam Clerk, what's up?
Sorry, my apologies. I just wanted to confirm whether there were any Board of Health members that wish to defer those minutes based on a request that came from the board, or if you're okay to continue on.
Councillor Carlton.
I would ask that we defer those minutes until I think it's the first meeting in March, so that then we'll have two sets of minutes and Dr. Era will be available to speak to them.
Okay. Is there a seconder for that deferment? Councillor Keaveney. Any further discussion? Anyone opposed to that? That is carried. Bylaws. 3 bylaws there. I think we can take them all as one, can we, Madam Clerk? Yes, we can. So the first one is to authorize disposition of land in the city of Owen Sound. The second is to appoint the auditors of the Corporation of County of Grey. And the third is to confirm all actions and proceedings of the council. Someone care to move that? Councillor Dickert, seconded by Councillor Mackey. Any discussion? Anyone opposed to those being adopted? That is carried. Good news and celebrations. I know Councillor Savannah had something she wanted to add. There she is. Good morning, Savannah. Welcome.
Hello. Good morning, everybody. Happy snowy Thursday. We wanted to share the good news that last week during Planning and Economic Development Advisory Committee, we released the department's first ever annual report. It's a 40-page document, so it includes highlights about different projects and initiatives that the department has been doing, as well as results and outcomes that we're seeing by actually actioning the priorities outlined in our master plan. So as you know, last year was the very first year that we started work on the master plan, and a lot has been done. We probably could have made it a 100-page report, but we're trying to find a balance between providing high-level information so that council and staff can use it as a reference guide. So that if you are questioned at all about what are we doing, what does the initiative or program look like, or the support from our department, you have something quick and easy to refer to. So when we're together on the 27th, we have physical copies of the report for all of you, along with packages to bring home to all of your municipal councillors. And in that package, you'll also find the newest edition of all of the regional maps, as well as a brand new trail guide that was developed to talk about all of the trails locally in your communities. So you'll have a really nice physical package of lots of new printed material to come home to. And we really invite you to use it as a reference guide. And hopefully this is something that we can continue. We will continue it every year. We are committed to making sure that this report is published annually. And it tells you a little bit about what's coming up and what's being completed each and every year. So if you have any questions, I am very happy to answer them, but looking forward to getting those copies to you as well.
Most excellent. Thank you, Savannah. Sounds like a lot of work has gone into it. Well, I know a lot of work has gone into that and a lot of good work. Absolutely. Anyone else? Councillor Kentner.
Thank you. I think did I just mute myself?
No, you're good.
Okay. Just as a member of the Social Services Committee, I wanted to pass on, if you didn't see it, the celebration of 31 days without a call for treatment or worse, on behalf of the SOS team. Really a nice good news story to launch the year. And I'm sure a lot of you did see it, but I think we should mention it here and salute all of the people involved in keeping all those people who are having addiction issues safe.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, Ross. Anyone else? Councillor Carlton, please.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Warden. Just a comment about National Flag Day taking place on Saturday and the festivities and such that are going to take place, I think, in different municipalities that we can all support and that lend themselves to a solidarity as Canadians in supporting our national constitution, our solidarity, working together and keeping a free country. So just want to make sure everybody's aware of that National Flag Day.
Excellent. Thank you, Sue. Councillor Eccles.
Thank you, Deputy Warden. And I have the pleasure and just like to say thank you for the invite to the kickoff for Black History Month. It was in Dundalk. I believe it was the 1st of February.
Yep.
Was able to join yourself there, and great kickoff. And with the amount of history and that is in Black history, and I think it was fantastic, and that it's the whole month of celebrations. I believe we have a number of activities going on at Grey Roots as well too. So get out there and get ourselves a lot more educated on Black history here, and certainly the Emancipation Festival that continues to happen in Owen Sound in the summer. But that historical fact that the end of the Underground Railway is Grey County and Owen Sound, among other tremendous historical facts that have been kind of buried that should be more prominent in our schools and our education of how Grey County and the area was settled. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Kevin. Indeed, Junction Community Initiatives do a tremendous job throughout the month of February, noting Black History Month. Anyone else have any news, celebrations? Okay, not seeing any. I'll ask for a motion to adjourn the council portion of our meeting today. Councillor McQueen, seconded by Councillor Hutchison. Anyone opposed to adjourning? Not seeing any. That is carried. We'll just give Rob a minute to switch us over to Committee of the Whole.
You're good to go, Mr. Deputy Warden.
Thank you, Rob. Appreciate that. And again, I'll welcome everybody to our Committee of the Whole meeting this morning, February 13th. I'll call the meeting to order. Is there any declaration of interest related to any matter on this agenda? Not seeing any. Business arising from minutes. We have a motion here regarding the Markdale Rail Trail. Councillor McQueen, would you like to move that motion? I believe that was yours, was it not?
Yes, I will.
Okay, thank you. Is there a seconder? Councillor Nielsen will second that motion. Councillor McQueen, would you like to speak to that?
Yes, thank you, Deputy Warden, and good morning, County Council. And it's pretty straightforward. I did raise this at our last County Council meeting. As you are quite aware, we are getting quite a winter, and the winter sports are everybody is enjoying the snow, along with other than the snowmobilers. It's been a great winter for the trails, and so what I'm seeking here is I don't know if I need to read it, Mr. Deputy Warden, but it is pretty straightforward. Is looking for maybe a possible solution. I will say it has been a busy area, as I understand, and as of note, I know a few weeks back or thereabouts there was a ride for cancer, snowmobile ride for cancer, and I know that was a challenging situation as itself was with regards to this as a staging area. I think they did manage and were able to figure something out to use the space, but it is a very popular spot. I will say that not only just snowmobilers are using it right now for a staging area, but others that enjoy the trail, they park there, they walk the trail, snowshoe, ski, whatever they wish to do on that trail as well. So it's not just the snowmobile clubs or the enthusiasts that enjoy the snowmobile trail itself. But I also one last comment is this is a staging area that does it's the center of Grey County, and it does provide access to different parts of Grey County. One is Owen Sound. I know there are a lot of snowmobilers that do go into Owen Sound, and I know quite a few years back, Owen Sound opened up an area or allowed them to come into to get gas and provide I guess a revenue for businesses and how food and all that kind of stuff there, and along through down to our southern part is you, Mr. Warden, Southgate and beyond. So the snow has been, the trail system I think has never been as good as it has been this winter for a lot of years, and I know that there are a lot of enthusiasts out there that do run not just older snowmobiles, but high-priced and costly machines that they only have a short season, and this year they're trying to make up for it. So again, it's pretty straightforward. Just looking for a solution that we have always had in the past. Cleared this spot as a staging area, and I'll leave it at that. If there's any questions, Mr. Deputy Warden.
Very good. Thank you, Paul. Anyone else wish to speak to the motion? Councillor Gregg. You're muted, sir. Darn it. There you go.
That's unfortunate after I did so well in the singing of the national anthem. A question for staff. A year ago, we we did have a budget allotment, I think from memory, of $30,000 or $40,000, and it was reduced to support snow clearing at two properties, Collapore and Markdale. The motion wasn't clear and direct and specific to one of those properties. So I just wonder if staff could speak to what alternatives are here. If we're not involved in the business of clearing that snow, can we not provide permission through our planning department so Grey Highlands can go in there and actively pursue that? And also, I guess an additional question is, I don't think the taxpayers of Grey County should be footing the bill to support parking for individuals that might be traveling to the community. Yes, I understand the supports that we receive economically through the snowmobilers' activities in Grey County, but you can make that argument for a wealth of different activities. And I'm just going to use I can stay at a B&B in Markdale and go cross-country skiing, or at wonderful Walters Falls and go skiing and support the economy in the same way. So I do believe if there's a report coming back, can staff pursue what a paid parking model would look like? And I think of the Bruce Ski Club at Hepworth. Those members pay for snow removal for them to park at that Grey Sauble Conservation Authority property. So if there's a report comes back, I'd like to see staff be able to comment on the feasibility of incorporating paid parking at that location, so the cost is not borne by the general taxpayer.
Thank you, sir. And just to be clear, the motion as proposed, and I don't want to get into a drawn out debate on the merits of the trail system and the snowmobilers and anyone else that, visitors that come, because we can all agree that that's all good. The motion is asking for a report to come back to council on the feasibility or options of clearing that parking lot. So let's try to stay on that piece, at least, and unless somebody amends the motion, of course, but that's where we're at right now. Scott, I see you have your hand up. Go ahead, please.
Great, thanks. Through you, Mr. Deputy Warden, maybe I'll take a moment to respond to Councillor Gregg's questions and also some of Councillor McQueen's points who raised this matter. So Councillor Gregg is correct. 2 years ago at budget time, on December 15th, 2023, we did have a good discussion on the trails budget at that time. As council will recall, it was a very tight budget year, and staff and council worked together to look for options that could result in some savings. At that time, the county had been clearing 2 parking lots that are used for our forests and trails throughout the winter. And so that was the Collapore lot over on Grey Road 2, and that was this lot in Markdale off of Grey Road 12 or Main Street in Markdale. Councillor Gregg is correct. We had around $30,000 proposed in the budget going into that December 15th meeting. But based on the direction from council and a healthy discussion at council at that time, we did reduce it to $20,000. And there were some comments made from council about options for the Markdale lot, whether or not there was any other means to get that lot cleared. And since then, we have further investigated those options. We've talked to Pat's team in Transportation Services, and they've noted that they don't have the ability to clear it on a regular basis based on their equipment and pressures elsewhere. We've had a similar discussion just recently with staff in Grey Highlands, and they gave a very similar answer in terms of they don't have the capacity. We also reached out to the Snowmobile Club and said, do you have either capacity or do you have monies that you could help put towards this in terms of that clearing? They also noted that they didn't have anything they could offer in that regard. And I don't say that in any way as a strike against the Snowmobile Club. They've been a wonderful partner over the years, and we look to continue that partnership. So going into 2020, late winter of 2024 and into 2025, staff made the decision based on the amount that was in the budget and based on that discussion from council in 2023 to continue to plow the parking lot at Collapore, but to discontinue plowing in Markdale. And based on the direction from council, we could have done that already in 2024, but at that point, when it was December 15th, 2023, we already had a contractor lined up. So we continued on with the contract for last winter, but then into this winter, we've discontinued that. If there's an appetite from council for a report back, certainly staff would be happy to write the report. The one thing I would note is, although it's plenty snowy out there today, I'm anticipating we're going to run out of winter here within the next month or two, hopefully. And so if there's a desire to start seeing this lot plowed earlier, and if it was council's direction, staff have reached out to a contractor to see if clearing is possible this year, and they have indicated that it would be. We've worked with our purchasing team, and so if it was council's direction, we could start plowing immediately. With the money to come from any savings realized in the Forestry and Trails budget, and if there wasn't the savings available in that regard, we would draw the money from the Trails Reserve. So that's hopefully a high-level overview, and certainly happy to take any more questions if there are any.
Excellent. Thank you, Scott, for that. Any further discussion? Councillor Mackey, please.
Thanks. Good morning, Deputy Warden and County Council. I guess my question through you, Deputy Warden, to Scott is, how many parking areas do we have along the rail trail system? I know in Chatsworth, we keep the old arena parking lot free and clear of snow for snowmobilers to go there. That's done by the lower tier municipality, and I think that's working fine. But I guess I'm wondering how many other spots, are there places in Dundalk? Are there places in Owen Sound for the tourism industry for these snowmobilers to park? I'm not sure every community needs to have a paid or unpaid parking area, but I think in my mind there's maybe enough right now without adding any more. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Scott, do you have a response to that, please?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Deputy Warden. It's a good question, Councillor Mackey. In terms of parking lots that the county owns, this would be the only formal one, other than, some people choose to launch their snow machines from the county admin building in Owen Sound here. But as you point out, there are a number of other lots throughout the 77-kilometer long trail, including, as you noted, the parking lot in Chatsworth. We've recently worked with the township of Southgate as part of the future construction of their medical clinic to allow for some parking in Dundalk for that launching off point. And there are certainly locations in Owen Sound and in other areas where people would launch their machines from. I would note we do have a parking lot, county-owned parking lot in Rockford that was constructed a year or two ago. In this case, again, because of the budget pressures, we haven't been clearing that lot. But in future years, we could have that discussion if there was an appetite in the future for a staff report on the option for paid parking throughout some of our county facilities. We could look into that further as staff as well.
Thank you, Scott. Councillor Boddy, please.
Thank you, Deputy Warden. Looking at the motion, I'm not opposed to the report, except that it's just on the option of removing snow from that parking lot. So what I'd like to do is move an amendment to the motion that would add at the end, so instead of a period at the end of the trail, would add and other alternative parking options, so that we can look at other options as well when we get that report. If there's another parking lot, there may not be, I might be, out in left field, but if there's other options that we could use to park to get close to the trail, I'd like to know what they are.
Okay, thank you, sir. Is there a seconder for that amendment? Councillor Duveen, you seconding? Okay, thank you. Discussion on the amendment. Not seeing any, I'll call the vote. Is anyone opposed to the amendment as proposed? Councillor Gregg? Councillor Mackey? Okay. That is carried. So now we're back to the motion as amended. Any further discussion? Councillor McQueen.
As you indicated, Mr. Warden, I don't want to get into a lot of details because we're looking for a report to come back. But I will say that maybe the numbers need to be brushed off this year. But At one time, they used to say the snowmobiling industry would, for the Ontario economy, was over $3 billion probably in a good winter versus other winters. But we have spent a lot of money on this trail system over the years. I think there was maybe I'll look to Mr. Mackey, $745,000 in a particular crossing just outside of Chatsworth. And as one might say, you cut your nose in spite of your face, but we have this trail system for 4 seasons, and I think that with regards to Grey County in the sense of tourism and economic development, this would be a small piece to consider for what the dollar values that come into Grey County, and I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion on the amended motion? Not seeing any, I'll call the vote. Anyone opposed to this? So now we're voting to get a report back. Is anyone opposed to getting a report back? Okay, that is carried. So a report will come back when it's prepared. There's no delegations this morning. Consent agenda is there. Is there any item that needs to be removed for further discussion? Councillor Greig.
6H, please.
6H is in Harry. Okay. Any others? Not seeing any. Would someone care to move or receive the consent agenda, save and except for 6H? Councillor Bordignon, thank you. Councillor McKay will second. Anyone opposed? Sorry. Oh, okay. Anyone opposed? That is carried. Items for direction and discussion. The first this morning is the closed meeting investigation report from Airden Bearless. Madam Clerk, you're going to introduce the speaker of this report, please.
Excuse me, thank you very much. And just for County Council's information, we did receive a closed meeting investigation from the joint meeting held August 8th, 2024. Megan Barrett from Airden Bearless is in attendance today to provide you with an overview of the report and answer any questions you have. So welcome, Megan.
Welcome, Megan. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. And good morning, Council. Through you, Deputy Warden. My name is Megan Barrett. I'm a lawyer and a partner at Airden Bearless, and was the lead investigator and the author of the closed meeting report that's attached to your agenda this morning. So I want to start with a discussion of the request that our office received. It was a formal request for a closed meeting investigation regarding the closed session of the Special County of Grey joint all councils meeting that occurred on August 8th of last year. The request alleged that the meeting contravened Section 239 of the Municipal Act as council, and when I say council in this presentation, I mean the joint all council, which is comprised of all members of council of each of the member municipalities. So at that meeting, the allegation is that council discussed matters in closed session that went beyond the 2 stated exceptions relied on in the resolution for holding the closed meeting, and that was labor relations or employee negotiations under clause 239 sub 2D and solicitor client privilege under clause 239 2F. And of course, these exceptions are to the open meeting rule in Section 239 of the Municipal Act that requires all meetings to be open to the public except in specific enumerated circumstances or exceptions, which are set out in the Act. So those are 2 of those exceptions. As detailed in the report, we concluded following our investigation that the allegations in the request could not be sustained, and that council was entitled to rely on the cited exceptions for the closed meeting. There was an additional and unusual allegation in the request regarding an alleged failure to comply with the process set out in the County of Grey Collaborative Decision-Making Framework. So as noted in paragraph 11 of our report, whether council complied with the process set in the collaborative framework is outside of the scope of our jurisdiction to investigate, and so we did not. But furthermore, the collaborative framework appears to be a policy guidance document and is clearly separate and apart from the county's procedural bylaw. And that procedural bylaw is part of our jurisdiction, but the collaborative framework is not part of that bylaw. With respect to our investigation, we reviewed the background materials that are listed at paragraph 12 of the report. And we also conducted telephone interviews with 2 members of senior staff who were in attendance at that meeting. And we were satisfied on the basis of these interviews that we had sufficient information to conclude our investigation. The details of the meeting and the resolution to convene in closed session are set out in detail on pages 3 and 4 of the report. I won't go through those in detail. As part of our report, we reviewed and considered the procedure that was followed at the meeting. And that's set out on starting on page 4 of the report. We concluded, based on our review, that the procedure that was followed that day, and it's the standard procedure as I understand it, met all procedural requirements and best practices for a meeting. With respect to the applicability of the exception for labor relations and employee negotiations, our analysis is set out at page 5 of the report. As noted, the purpose of this exception is to protect discussions regarding the relationship between a municipality and its employees. Based on our investigation, we concluded that the main topic and focus of the meeting fell within the scope of this exception under the Act. Specifically, the presentation to Council and the subsequent discussion focused on the staffing impacts of a shared planning service model. And while some background information about shared planning services was presented as context for Council's consideration of whether to direct senior staff to take the next step and advise planning staff that Council was considering restructuring the delivery of planning services, the Ombudsman has previously held, and we agree, that this level of information and discussion in this context is permitted in a closed session. And that's set out in more detail in the report. With respect to our analysis on the exception for solicitor-client privilege, our analysis starts at page 6 of the report. The purpose of this exception is to ensure that Council can speak frankly about legal advice without the fear of disclosure. In this case, there was no lawyer present at the meeting, which there does not need to be in order to take advantage of this exception. However, confidential legal advice from the county's solicitor was presented to Council by the county's Director of Human Resources and met the test under the Act. The final substantive section of the report addresses the allegation in the request that the primary topic of discussion at the meeting was shared planning services. And while the matter of shared planning services will affect employees, the request alleges, other considerations such as the impact on the public, municipal finances, and effective planning weighed in favor of holding at least part of the discussion in open session. So we consider this submission from the requester. And this is addressed at paragraphs 43 and 44 of our report. We understand that there were some questions from members of Council at the meeting regarding implementation of the shared services model during the closed session. But based on our investigation and specifically our interviews with the members of staff that were present at the meeting, we understand that Council were advised that these matters would be dealt with in greater detail as part of a subsequent public process, and we're aware that that did in fact occur. Based on our investigation and consideration of applicable case law, we concluded that the focus of the meeting was directly related to the subject matter for which Council resolved to convene in closed session. And additionally, and finally, we found that even if there were some parts of the discussion that could possibly have been held in open session, those portions of the meeting were inextricably linked, and that's very important when we're considering the case law, to the in-camera discussion, for discussions which were properly held in a closed session. So based on our conclusions that council did not contravene the Municipal Act and did not hold an improper meeting, we did not make any substantive recommendations. But we did provide this report in accordance with our statutory obligations and for your information. Thank you very much. I am happy to answer any questions if there are any arising.
Thank you, Megan, for that very encompassing report. It was well done. I do need a mover and seconder before we go into any discussion. Moved by Councillor DeBreen, second by Councillor Bordigno. Thank you very much. Are there any questions for Megan? Councillor Gregg, please.
Thank you for the opportunity, and through you, thanks for the presentation, Megan. This is actually probably a question just back to staff, but would staff be able to comment on the approximate cost to the corporation for such an investigation to be held?
Tara, do you have any thoughts on that, or?
I don't. We're not sure what the cost of this particular investigation has been. I can speak from past experience. There can be a range in costs, and the last one we had, I believe, was just over $1,000.
Thank you, Tara. I was going to guess between $1.380 and $1 bazillion, but plus HST. But anyone else have any questions for Megan? Okay, not seeing any. I'll ask if anyone is opposed to receiving this report. Seeing none, I will declare that carried. Thank you very much, Megan. Appreciate your time and your efforts.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Okay, moving on to the next item is Forest Management Bylaw Update. Someone care to move and second that, please? Councillor Hutchison and Councillor Keaveney, thank you very much. Who is Sarah online, or who's going to be taking this? Oh, Scott. Okay, Scott, please.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Warden, and I apologize. It was supposed to be Sarah Johnson here today. She is under the weather and doesn't have a voice, so you're stuck with me again. So luckily I have a voice, I think.
I think you have a pretty good one. Yes.
I'm just going to share my screen here. Could you just confirm, Mr. Deputy Warden, that you can see what's on the screen there?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for your time here this morning, Council. We'll just get right into it. So as you're likely aware, Grey County has had a forest management bylaw in place for over 20 years now. That bylaw is getting a little long in the tooth, and there have been some legislative changes that have happened since its passing in the early 2000s, as well as staff having worked with the bylaw now for 20 years have noticed some deficiencies in the bylaw that we would like to seek some direction on potentially correcting. Some of you that have been around a little while may recall that we did actually launch this process in early 2020, and there was a staff report to Committee of the Whole at that time. And the thought was we would go out and do some consultation on a new bylaw, prepare a draft for Council's consideration, then look to update the bylaw. We had prepared our first consultation session for mid-March of 2020. And I think we all know what happened sort of in early March of 2020. And long story short, that project got shelved based on some other necessities that we were dealing with at the time related to the pandemic. We are excited to hopefully relaunch the process here now. And I just want to give you a little background on the forest management bylaw itself, as well as the proposed changes through the new bylaw for Council's consideration. So a forest management bylaw regulates forests, and regulates woodlands, sorry. When I say woodlands, I mean those wooded areas a hectare or greater in size. And so that hectare doesn't have to be all on a single property. It can be a hectare spanning multiple properties, or it can be multiple hectares on a single property. This is different than some of your own municipal tree bylaws. So that the county deals with the woodland, so to speak, the bigger groupings of trees, and a number of our municipalities have individual tree bylaws. Some only deal with trees on public lands, versus some get into private trees as well. So that could get down into smaller clusters of trees, less than a hectare, or in some cases, even individual trees in that regard. And one of the goals of this review would be to ensure that the county's bylaw and any municipal bylaws are working in tandem together. We don't ever want to get into a situation where somebody's needing to apply for a permit under multiple bylaws. if the municipality is already sufficiently regulating something, then certainly the county doesn't need to wade into that, and vice versa. If the county's bylaw already covers our woodlands, then the municipal bylaws don't need to touch on some of those matters as well. So with respect to what's being proposed here, what we're seeking today is direction from council to proceed with consultation on a new bylaw. And linked to the report, there is a draft of the new bylaw, but we're not asking for council's blessing to pass the bylaw today, simply to go out and start those conversations. With respect to some of the changes in the new bylaw, under the current bylaw, there's basically two main types of harvesting applications. The one that council might be most familiar with is our minor exemption applications. Minor exemptions are when we're looking at clear cutting a section of woodland. Those get circulated to neighbors and agencies and municipalities, and then those decisions come back before County Committee of the Whole for their approval in that regard. The other type of forestry permits, which council might be less familiar with, are those selective harvesting permits. And the selective harvesting permits are when somebody has a woodland and wants to just go and thin the bush. And there's two types of selective harvesting permits under the current bylaw. One is when those permits are being done in accordance with good forestry practices. And so that's thinning the forest a little bit, but still leaving plenty of mature growth to continue on and the succession to come up behind there. And the other is a circumference limit harvest. And this circumference limit harvest is, again, thinning the bush, but rather than being based on good forestry practices, the forester would go in and remove the biggest, sort of most profitable trees, if you will. And while that makes sense from a dollars and cents perspective, it's not always the best for the woodland or the forest as a whole. So under this new bylaw, one of the changes in the bylaw is to remove the circumference limit harvesting such that any selective harvesting would be done in accordance with good forestry practices. And I should have said, under the current bylaw and under the new bylaw, those selective permits are staff delegated. And in this case, it's our forest enforcement officer that's issuing those permits. It's not a public process in terms of being circulated to neighbors or anyone else. It's being done based on the principles in the bylaw and of good forestry for those selective harvests. With respect to the minor exemptions under the new bylaw, we're proposing to rename that to special permits. Minor exemption was creating some confusion with respect to some planning terminology around minor variances and other such things, and so special permits is maybe more appropriate here. We are looking to change the process for minor exemptions a little bit to mimic some of our county planning processes in that regard, such that when somebody comes in with an application, in this case for a special permit, formerly minor exemption, they would need to submit a complete application. So that would show exactly what they're proposing to clear, and if necessary, it might also include the requirement for an environmental impact study. Once we have that complete application, staff would begin to process the application. It would get circulated again to municipalities, conservation authorities, neighbors. We are looking to extend the circulation timeframe just slightly. The current bylaw speaks to 15 calendar days. The new bylaw would speak to 15 business days. Those calendar days just get a little tricky. Say if someone submits a minor exemption application on December 23rd, and you've got some holidays and everything else in there, maybe some weekends. So we're just looking to extend that slightly. One of the other changes we're looking at through this process is the ability to add conditions to these minor exemption applications, or now special permit applications. Some of those conditions could include things like replanting certain areas of the property, or if they were cutting in one area and replanting in another, or they could include timeframes for when the harvest can be done to avoid bird breeding seasons and various other things in that regard. Again, these would be similar to some of the powers we already have under the Planning Act and conditions that we would attach to planning approvals. And finally, one of the other things the draft bylaw is looking at is allowing county council the ability to delegate those special permits, or formerly minor exemptions, to staff. And so the bylaw isn't saying they are delegated, but council would have the authority should this council or future council choose to delegate those decisions. In some cases, maybe they're still worthy to come before council. In other cases, maybe they're more procedural in nature and something staff could handle within certain guidelines as set by council through the bylaw. Some of the other changes being proposed are some updates to stop work orders. the ability to require somebody who has been caught in an infraction to the bylaw to rehabilitate or replant the property. Quite frankly, when we impose penalties under the current bylaw, if those penalties are able to stick, they are financial penalties, and quite often they don't do a whole lot in terms of preserving the overall wooded cover or replanting some of those trees that were taken out erroneously in that regard. So under the new bylaw, our first preference, if feasible, would be that we work with the landowner to rehabilitate or replant the trees. And only in extreme cases would we get to situations where we need to seek financial penalties. Those penalties are being proposed to increase. Previously, for a first conviction, the penalty was $10,000 or $1,000 per tree, and subsequent convictions were $250,000 or $2,500 per tree. As you can see on the screen there, we are looking to increase those significantly. We did run into some situations under the old bylaw where people were just viewing these penalties as the cost of doing business and not even seeking permits or trying to comply with the bylaw. So in order to speak to some of the priorities that council set through the Climate Change Action Plan and other elements of the various plans, including our official plan, we are looking to make the penalties more severe for those infractions in that regard. And so with respect to next steps on this process, should council provide direction today to move forward, we would look at some robust consultation in this regard. Certainly consultation with your own municipal staff would be key, but we've also identified Indigenous communities, farmers, the forestry and logging industries, the development industry, conservation authorities, the Niagara Escarpment Commission, and the broader general public as key partners to consult with in this regard. Following that consultation, we'd look to prepare a finalized version of the bylaw for council's consideration. So as part of this staff report, we are seeking that the report be received, that we be given direction to move forward with consultation, and that following that consultation, we'd report back to County Council with a finalized version of the bylaw. I apologize, I probably haven't done it justice in the same way that Sarah could, but hopefully I've given you a taste of it and certainly can try to answer any questions if there are any. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. I'm sure Sarah would be pleased with how you handled that. Are there any questions? Councillor McQueen.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Warden. I was just sort of looking through the exemptions of the bylaw here, and I guess a couple things that maybe I'd like to to have addressed. And I see there's the normal farm practices. So what I'm saying, a couple things. For personal use of firewood or firewood for sale to add to sale of farm revenue. So maybe I'll start there. I have a number of ones.
Scott.
Through you, Mr. Deputy Warden. Thank you for your comments and questions, Councillor McQueen. Some of the exemptions that are in the current bylaw and carried forward to the new bylaw, my understanding, are legislated in that we have to provide them. And so there's certain exemptions that work in conjunction with other pieces of legislation, like the Planning Act or the Agri-Resources Act. And there's other pieces or there's other exemptions that we have a little bit more leeway on. Specifically with respect to farming and farm usage, under the current bylaw, if a farmer wants to clear cut an area for the purposes of making a new field or expanding their operation in that regard, it would require a minor exemption application. Under the new bylaw, there would be similar provisions for that special permit. If the farmer is looking to maintain a fence line, or if you go out in the spring and there's new seedlings that have popped up, certainly you don't need a permit for that. We did have an instance a number of years ago where there was a farmer that had cleared some land, and the county sought charges in that regard because a permit wasn't issued, and the matter got referred to the Normal Farm Practices Board. In that case, the Normal Farm Practices Board, and that was one specific case, found in the county's favor to say that, the county allows for farming to continue. We allow for maintenance of those hedgerows and everything else. But the board found that it wasn't unreasonable for the county to require a permit when there was clear cutting being proposed. With respect to some of the other points you brought up, both the new bylaw and the new proposed bylaw and the existing bylaw already allow for cutting for your own personal use. So if you want to go back to the bush and cut for firewood, yep, that's totally okay. You know, you can't clear cut a bush and say that you cut it all for firewood, but there's exemptions built in there. There's exemptions in both bylaws where somebody has a building permit. So if we go back to the farm example, if somebody applied for a building permit for a new barn or drive shed or silo or what have you, then you don't need a forest management bylaw permit for that. That's covered by your building permit. So staff believe that that the new bylaw strikes a balance between preserving farmers' ability to continue about their operations with minimal headaches and hassles from the county, but also protecting our wooded cover, which we know is so important to our landscape and our community in that regard. We did have an initial discussion with this one with the Agricultural Advisory Committee, and certainly if council provides direction here today, we look forward to reaching back out to that committee and other farmers to understand whether we've hit the right tone here or whether in fact we do need further changes. Sorry, that was a bit of a long-winded answer, but happy to take any further questions.
No, that's good, Scott. And again, as I said to an earlier report, we're not looking to litigate the bylaw here this morning. We're just looking for direction to consult with the community and on advisory groups on a new bylaw. But nonetheless, Councillor McQueen.
I just want to seek some clarity, and I understand that Deputy Warden, we're going through a process, but I guess where I want to expand, certainly from personal use, but you may go into a forest area and cut selective timbers out to add or replace your sills in your barn or your old bank barn. You may look for selective. I guess the part that comes back is you go in and cut a half a dozen trees that are selective for that purpose, or maybe a dozen to replacing the barn thrash floor in your barn. All of a sudden there's a $5,000 per tree fine. I think there's something that just sort of warrant a little bit of a conversation around that, or you're cutting fence post or whatever for that purpose. The other thing that I want to go back on is fence rows. Like this mentioned about 2 hectares or more. Are we talking fence rows now that are being protected, or farmers are allowed to take fence rows out? What are you saying there, Scott, in that sense with regards to fence rows?
Scott, please.
Yeah, thank you, Deputy Warden. Through you, with respect to the own use, to Councillor McQueen, farmers would still be allowed to go cut for cedar fence posts or to rehabilitate a barn or any of that sort of thing. So that's not the type of thing that the county ever, in my knowledge anyway, has ever pursued charges over. Those are own personal use, and quite frankly, we're not looking to stick our nose in there. If we got a call and somebody had cleared 50 acres, then that probably goes a little beyond own personal use, and that's where we'd be getting more involved.
Absolutely.
I apologize. I forgot the second part of your question already. I'm sorry, if you could repeat it.
You just mentioned hedgerows or fence rows. I thought you mentioned here that this bylaw is pertaining to hectare or more of greater forest area. A fence row is a row of trees that maybe is decided to be removed to make a field bigger. This isn't pertaining to fence rows.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification. Yeah, so the current bylaw, one doesn't need a permit to clear hedgerows or fence rows. This is something I think under the new bylaw, we're going to be very interested to hear from the agricultural community on. And even a couple of years ago in one of the discussions at the Agricultural Advisory Committee at the county, I think there was some that were saying, yep, stay out of farmers' way. They need the ability to do that. And there was others on the committee that were saying, no, actually, those provide valuable resources, not necessarily just from a habitat perspective, but also from an erosion and windbreak perspective in that regard. So the new bylaw, as it's written right now, my understanding would still allow for the clearing of those fence lines and hedgerows in that regard. But I think that's something we're going to want to hear more from the farm community on. As I said, the bylaw speaks to a hectare or greater, and certainly, maybe if you had a lot of hedge rows, you could maybe string together a long linear hectare. But that wasn't the intent of the current bylaw or the draft bylaw. But that might be a topic we get some divisive opinions on.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.
Good, Paul?
Yep.
Okay.
I'll leave my comments to a further time.
All right. Thank you very much. Councillor Mackey.
Thanks, Deputy Warden. And through you to Scott. Good forestry practices, Scott. Who establishes those? Is that a provincial authority? Because, we will have a forestry with the county. There are private foresters. So is it a standardized good forestry practice?
Scott?
Yeah, thank you for your question, Councillor Mackey. So I'm just keep looking at my other screen to refer to some references here. So good forestry practices is defined in the bylaw itself, and that stems back to my understanding as a definition in the Forestry Act. The other thing to note is that both public and private foresters can be certified as a registered professional forester. So certainly some of the conservation authorities have those on staff, and the folks that we contract out at Gray Sauble have their registered professional forestry designations. So similar to how I operate as a planner, there's certain definitions and codes of ethics within there that constitute what a responsible forestry is and good forestry practices. So that's about the extent of my knowledge. I could certainly look into it further and dig up that definition from the Act, but it is a defined term, and my understanding is there is some meat on the bone there, such that it's not sort of purely subjective, in that you could have somebody saying this is good forestry and somebody else saying no, that's actually good forestry, kind of thing.
Thank you, Scott. And if I might, Mr. Warden, one follow-up question, and I guess it kind of is a continuation of Councillor McQueen's. But over the last number of years, with the increased value in cropland, we've seen marginal farmland that might fall under the definition of our woodlands, that are covered with hawthorn trees or, small apple trees that are being brought back for agricultural land. Would the agricultural community be prohibited from doing that with this bylaw?
Through you, Mr. Deputy Warden. I think it would depend. There's case by case scenarios. First and foremost, we would need to understand whether or not what was proposed for clearing met the definition of a woodlot. Of a woodland, sorry, and there is a definition both in the current and proposed bylaw on what constitutes a woodland, and it has to do with the number of trees per hectare, and if you're getting into lower numbers of trees, the diameter at breast height of those trees per hectare. So there's four classes of what could constitute a woodland. One of the things we're looking to do through the new bylaw is to put in more verbiage around those instances where we might have dead or dying trees or invasives in that regard. So certainly when the emerald ash borer started to sweep through the county, we were seeing significant damages to some woodlots that had heavy ash content in that regard. And certainly even in our own county forests, as county council will be well aware, we've seen greater and greater amounts of invasive species like the buckthorn. So, I think the balance we're trying to strike here is certainly not to stand in anyone's way in terms of removing those invasive species. But we also want to make sure that's not abused, and that you're not clearing a whole woodland that maybe is 10% ash on the basis that you've got the emerald ash borer in there. So certainly something we can dig into further and understand better. But if council has any thoughts or direction as we go through this process, certainly staff are happy to take it or to research further in that regard.
Just a note, County Council, the Deputy Warden is experiencing technical difficulties, so past Warden Queen, if I could ask you to continue chairing in his absence momentarily, that would be appreciated. On the fly.
Sorry about that, Madam Clerk and Council.
No problem.
Cranky mood today.
Scott
Sorry, where are we
Taylor
at?
had Scott Taylor just answered a question from council, and Councillor Eccles has a question.
Very good. Councillor Eccles, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you is a question towards Scott. A number of years ago, the county, and I'm not sure just what the term is, but got all of their forests not licensed, but there was an application put forward on the forest, on the county forest, and best practices and everything, and got a certification at that time. The bylaw, how does it mesh in with that and with other individuals that have force and holding? I guess, sorry, Mr. Chair, I'm probably getting down into trying to put stuff in and out of this bylaw, and all we're trying to do is giving direction for staff to go forward. But for that certification, does the county still have certified certification on the force?
Scott?
Through you, Mr. Warden. Yeah, thank you for raising those comments, Councillor Eccles. So a number of the councillors that have been around for a little bit longer will recall that the county went through a process back when the county forests were under the clerk's department to become FSC certified, and I might get the acronym wrong, but I believe it's Forest Stewardship Council certification. Basically, that's a voluntary certification that we submitted to demonstrate to the public and those that might be looking to purchase from our county forests that we are using good forestry practices and sustainable practices to manage our forests. So the county did that. Some of our conservation authorities have done that. Some have since backed out of that FSC certification. And our understanding is that certification might be changing here in the near future, and we might actually be coming back to council with a new certification that the county might consider. But as of today, we are still FSC certified. With respect to the bylaw itself, I don't know that it explicitly speaks to those type of certifications, but certainly the types of selective harvesting that we're talking about under those good forestry principles, those would be some of those same principles that the FSC group is looking at in certifying forests in that regard. It's something we could look into if there's a thought that there needs to be some verbiage in the bylaw about those types of certifications. But the one, I guess, caution from staff is, those things can change over time and evolve. And so, by putting in the good forestry practices, then it might cover all bases in terms of those individual certifications that a landowner may or may not have in that regard.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.
Okay, I see there's two more hands there, and I'm going to remind council again, we're not litigating the bylaw today. This is only a request to go forward in consultation. So with that said, Councillor Bourdignon, please.
Thank you, Deputy Warden. Through you, good morning, County Council. Scott, I just have a question. I know there's two parts: selective harvesting and clear cutting, and the county and the the lower tiers should not overlap. Is there any tie on clear cutting to development with the changes to this bylaw? That'd just be my only question, Mr. Deputy Warden, to Scott.
Scott.
Dear Mr. Deputy Warden, thank you for your question, Councillor Bourdignon. So there's a few things with respect to development in the current bylaw, but there's actually a new change in the proposed bylaw that I probably should have highlighted. So when somebody already has a development approval under the Planning Act, let's say a plan of subdivision or a site plan, they don't need a permit under our forest management bylaw. So the thought is they've been put through the paces in terms of submitting their environmental studies and going through public processes under the Planning Act, and therefore they don't need anything further under the forest management bylaw as long as they're abiding with any of the approvals they got under the Planning Act. What we've been facing more in recent years is developers coming forward to us and saying, hey, listen, I'd like to submit a Planning Act application. I'm looking at this big new plan of subdivision on 50 acres. And in order to do some of the due diligence on the property, including drilling boreholes for geotechnical studies and various other things, I do need to clear some trees in advance of submitting my application. And so the current bylaw doesn't really speak to that in any substantive way. It's sort of a binary system Either you have your Planning Act approvals and therefore you're exempt, or you don't have your Planning Act approvals and therefore you're looking for a permit under the Forest Management Bylaw. So one of the things that we're proposing through this new bylaw is to put in a system whereby a developer could be exempted for some selective clearing, assuming they've done some environmental work and demonstrated to us that they're not clearing endangered species or destroying endangered species habitat in that regard, to open the door to them submitting those Planning Act applications. But those environmental tests would still be sort of enforced, if you like, or tested through the Planning Act process. So the new bylaw certainly wouldn't open the door to a developer saying, hey, I want to clear my whole property, therefore I don't need to do my environmental study when I submit my applications. But potentially, if a draft similar to what's before you today were to go forward, it would allow for some selective cutting for the purposes of doing those technical studies that we need to have to constitute a complete application for a Planning Act application.
Thank you, Scott. You good, Peter? Councillor DeBreen. You are muted, ma'am. There you go.
My apologies. I had two computers going and I unclicked the other one. Thank you, Deputy Warden, and through you to Scott. A little bit ago, I had inquired to Lee Thurston at Grey Sauble about the forest management best practices and was surprised to learn that the province has abandoned its forests and are no longer being managed. So I guess my question to you is, I doubt very much the province is going to enter in upon this consultation. So how do we address those forests, the best forest management, as it could affect our county forests? And I'm not expecting an answer today, but through this process, which I'm supportive of, does good forest management include fire breaks and controlled underbrush burns to ensure that we are protecting the forests that we have from and protecting our fire service if they are called out to fight a fire? We all know what's happening elsewhere, and we certainly don't want that to happen here. So just things for consideration, because I don't know that certain individuals are going to enter in upon the consultation. Thank you.
Scott, any response there? Or are you good?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor DeBreen. Certainly we can look into some of those matters further. With respect to the fire piece, it's something that we're seeing more and more information on coming from the province, and we do actually have a layer in our official plan, which is trying to map those high risk areas. And again, I'm no expert here, but what I've been told in the past is many of the forest types that we have in Grey are not those most prone to fires in that regard. But certainly as our climate changes, we want to be wary of that. With respect to the province and their role in forestry, we know that over the years, the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry has had some cuts and some changes. Certainly, we'd love to tap into some of their expertise if they're willing to engage on this consultation. But primarily, this bylaw would regulate privately owned forests. So there are exemptions in there for municipal projects or for certain infrastructure projects, and so it wouldn't necessarily affect provincially owned forests in that regard. But if we could tap into their expertise, then we'd love to have any of those staff at the table.
Thank you, Scott. Councillor DeBreen.
So to that, would the ministry be circulated on or invited to the table? I guess is the important question. How do we tap into their expertise?
Scott.
Through you, Mr. Deputy Warden, we can certainly invite, and we can certainly send emails and make phone calls as to whether or not they have the current capacity to provide us input. I'm not sure, but certainly we've been working with different ministry staff as part of our outdoor management group, and to the extent they can, they've been wonderful to deal with, and their hearts are in the right place, and like everybody, they're stretched with resources, but we'll certainly make that effort to engage in that regard and see what we can come up with.
Thank you, Scott. Councillor Gregg.
Thank you, Deputy Warden for the opportunity. I totally understand what your comments about we're not debating the actual bylaw here today. However, I do find sometimes we get to a place where we're almost at a critical path point, and I just want to make sure that we don't miss any items that should be discussed here today. I'm certainly leaning on my colleagues that present a bit more of a rural lens. I do have a question for Scott. It still hasn't been well defined to me on what has informed to where we're at now, particularly item 1, removal of circumference limit cutting and only allowing for managed cutting in accordance with good forestry practices. Has this been, have we got here because we've already consulted with private enterprises, or are we informing this draft bylaw only on the shoulders of essentially public personnel and conservation authority? Because there may be different perspectives that get executed here, and I'm concerned that we're at a draft bylaw stage that has not fully informed differing opinions and viewpoints. I think of, you know, if you remove a circumference cutting, and I have walked bushes, you will encounter instances where perhaps the farmer has one option: leave a big tree standing and accept the possibility of legal action if that tree finally lands in an adjoining neighbor's back of their house or shed, or B, cut it. And we're looking at now increasing the current fine 500% to the farmer to perhaps remove what is a liability standing in the woodlot. And it's because we're increasing or we're removing the circumference cutting. There's a couple components here I'm concerned with, how and who has informed where we're at here today, and why 500% of an increase from $1,000. That's pretty extreme.
Scott,
thank you for your questions, Councillor Gregg. With respect to the consultation that's been done to date, we've primarily been working as county staff and working with our excellent legal services staff, as well as some selected registered professional foresters that as you suspected our conservation authority staff in that regard. So certainly what we've heard from the professional foresters is that circumference limit harvesting can be damaging to the long-term health of the woodlot, but we're open to all perspectives in that regard. And one of the reasons we'd be doing this consultation, and particularly be tapping the forestry and logging industry on the shoulder there, is we want to hear those perspectives. And maybe there's some middle ground, or maybe there's something that we're misunderstanding or not understanding about the circumference limit harvesting. I think with respect to the scenario that you've outlined in terms of liability of a large tree or something else, I don't think we're getting quite that granular in terms of those good forestry permit harvests. What I understand from the good forestry practices is that you're taking a selection of diameters, but that you might also be targeting diseased or damaged trees. And those diseased or damaged trees, my understanding in most cases, are quite often the largest liability in terms of destroying a fence or a building or something in that regard. So we're certainly happy to bring back any feedback to council if we hear from the industry on that circumference limit harvesting. But to date, we haven't done robust public or forestry industry consultation just yet. With respect to your question about the fines, the fines are meant to be a deterrent on illegal activity, and those current fines were set quite some time ago. And without getting into the specifics of any individual cases, as I said, we have had those cases where under the current fines, it was easier just to sort of do the crime and pay the fine, so to speak, and that was the cost of doing business in terms of land clearing for future development or future other purposes in that regard. So we did want to create a disincentive there, but as I said in the presentation, our goal as staff isn't to lead with any kind of fine. Generally speaking, in the past, it's been to lead with education, and that would still be your goal. And the secondary goal would be, are there instances where it makes sense to order replanting rather than seeking a monetary penalty in that regard?
Thank you, Scott. Good, Councillor Greg.
Yeah, I'll just be glad in the future reporting when it's articulated that we've consulted those other communities closely, and that their input is certainly acknowledged in the forthcoming documents.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir. Any further discussion? Okay, I'll call the question. Anyone opposed to this? It's not seeing any. That is carried. It is 11:16. Do we require a break? Yep, I'm seeing some heads nodding. Let's come back at 11. We'll aim for 11:25. That'll give us 10 minutes. All right, see you then. Earning your lot today, Scott.
It's a planning heavy agenda. I apologize.
Oh, don't need to apologize. It's going great. It's going great. Although we are getting perilously close to the start of lunch.
Thank you for recognizing that, Mr. Chair.
Okay, it is 11:25. Madam Clerk, do we have a quorum returned? Looks like we must be close. Guess we can wait another minute or so if you wish.
We do have quorum.
Okay, I see a couple more have come back, so. Alrighty, we will reconvene, bring the meeting back to order. Thank you all. The next item of business is the report regarding the CP Rail Trail crossings in Dundalk. It's fairly lengthy resolution or motion there, so I will let, I need a mover and second. Councillor DeBreen will move, second by Councillor Carlton. Thank you so much. Scott, I think we're back to you.
Great.
Please.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Warden. I'll just share my screen here and we will get on with things. So hopefully everyone can see the PowerPoint. Great, thank you. So as council's aware, the county owns the 77-kilometer long CP Rail Trail that is maintained currently as both a trail, a multi-user trail, and an infrastructure corridor. But it's also preserved should there ever be an opportunity to have rail return to the county in that regard. The subject matter of this report is because of the growth of the community of Dundalk, we are seeing requests for 4 new road crossings of the trail. And just for council's benefit, in the existing scenario where we have a road crossing the trail, it would be the road authority that owns and maintains that road. So if it was a county road or a provincial highway, it would be the county or the province that owns and maintains the road, and the trail would simply cross the road, of course. In doing so, the county doesn't take on any liability, any added maintenance or liability with respect to the maintenance of those roads that cross the trail. More specifically, in terms of what's before us today, we have 2 proposed crossings in the north end of Dundalk, which would facilitate connections between 2 draft-approved plans of subdivision. It would also facilitate the construction of a new public school site in Dundalk, which is badly needed. And then we have 2 proposed crossings in the south end of Dundalk, and these would be to facilitate the township's extension of their Eco Parkway from Highway 10 to the current Eco Parkway. This would take some of the industrial traffic out of downtown Dundalk and off the county road in that regard. And so I've just got a few maps here to show you what I'm talking about. So this is the north end of Dundalk. We have in the blue and the red here, the blue is Glenelg Phase 2 draft plan of subdivision, and the red is Glenelg Phase 3. And then we have the CP Rail Trail, which bisects those 2 draft plans. And so if we move on to the next slide here, here's those 2 draft plans, and what you can see circled in red there are those sort of 2 connecting pieces between the 2 subdivisions that would cross the trail in that regard. And what you can see over here in Glenelg Phase 3 is the future school site. And so one of the reasons for the report being on the docket today is because the school board wants to move at lightning speed to get this school constructed. And I think we as a county and the Township of Southgate would echo those sentiments. It can't come soon enough. And so these subdivisions, although they've been draft approved, haven't been registered yet. And these aren't open and publicly maintained roads yet. So what we want to do is work with the Township of Southgate, and they've got a similar report coming to their council, I believe, on the 19th, and their staff have been great to work with. And we also want to work with the school board and Flato, who is the developer of these subdivisions, to allow access to the school and construction vehicles for the purposes of building that school ahead of these roads being opened as future maintained public roads that would be assumed by the township. So what you might see is a crossing at Street C here coming over to here to Street C. That would be temporary in terms of it would be only open to construction traffic or township traffic to maintain that, and not open to the public for the purposes of construction. And then later on, it would be built as a final road in that regard. And so in working with township staff, the county thought that it makes more sense, even though these roads won't be open immediately, to transfer the lands to the township to take kind of one party away from the table, so that the school board and the developer aren't having to sign separate agreements with the county and the township, and hopefully lead to a more expeditious construction of the school site here. With respect to the proposed crossings in the south end of Dundalk, this would be, as I said, extending Eco Parkway, which you can see down here in the township's business park, across the trail in 2 locations out to Highway 10. And if you like, this would provide a bit of a bypass through downtown Dundalk, whereby somebody traveling through Highway 10 could come onto Eco Parkway all the way through and down to Ida Street, and then connect to the county road on the sort of southwest end of Dundalk, if you will. So the township is looking at those 2 crossings. They've been consulting us right from day one. My understanding is they have completed their environmental assessment in this regard and would be looking to go to tender later this year for that project. And again, to expedite things and to hopefully make it easier for the township to issue those tender documents, the thought would be if we transfer these future road allowances now, then it would allow the township to proceed on their timelines in that regard. And this is just a schematic. You have Highway 10 over here. You would have the Eco Parkway extension coming through down here. And then these 2 red circles are the 2 trail crossings. And so, as you're aware, both the county's official plan and the Recreational Trails Master Plan support the long-term preservation of the trail corridor. So the county is not looking to convey the entire trail through Dundalk to the township. We're simply looking to convey those road crossings where we would have new township roads in that regard. The OP contains policies that don't support the crossing of the trail for private benefit of 1 or 2 properties, but county staff, in working with township staff, see the broader public benefits of these crossings, including the access to the future school site, the access to the business park, the access to these subdivisions, and overall fostering a connected community, which is what we all strive for at both the county and township levels in that regard. If direction is given to proceed with these conveyances, certainly one of the things we'd be working closely with the township and the developers on is safe crossings, to make sure we have the appropriate signage and gates at the crossings, the appropriate warnings on the roads, to ensure the safety of trail users in that regard. Our legal services staff have been amazing in coaching us through this process and highlighting what we need to understand from a legal perspective. And one of the things that they've recommended is that we maintain an easement in favor of the county for these crossings. And I should note, this isn't new territory for the county, and it's not new territory even in Dundalk. We've had similar reports in the past for the Hagan Street crossing, as well as the Victoria Street crossing. So this is territory we've tread before. The final bit is there is a small section of the trail in the south end of of Dundalk, where in order to facilitate that Eco Parkway expansion, there would need to be a slight lowering of the trail. So we've worked with our own transportation services staff, as well as Grace Sauble staff who help maintain the trails, and they have no issue with this lowering. And so that lowering would be done as part of the construction of the Eco Parkway expansion in that regard. So with that, staff are seeking direction that the report be received, that we be given direction to look at an agreement with the township for those 4 road crossings, as well as the lowering of the section of the trail. And if needed, that a temporary access agreement could be entered into to facilitate any survey work or other such work that might be needed prior to the formal conveyance of those crossings. That's what I have for today, but certainly be happy to take any questions if there are any.
Excellent. Thank you, Scott. Are there any questions or discussion? Councillor Eccles.
Interesting you would say that, Scott, about lowering the trail. Because one of your first points was maintaining the trail in a manner that should rail ever come back into play, then, we have a place to put the rail line. How is going to be lowering this trail, protecting the integrity of that option?
Scott?
Through you, Mr. Deputy Warden, thank you for your question, Councillor Eccles. This is precisely why we went out to our transportation staff and Grace Hobble staff, who have more engineering expertise than I do in this regard. Our understanding is the lowering of the trail would be negligible in that regard, and wouldn't hamper the county's ability, should rail ever return, to return it for that purpose. One of the other things we were concerned with here, we know there's some lower areas in Dundalk, is to make sure that we're not facing increased risk in the future of flooding out the trail or damage in that regard. And again, our understanding through talking to both the townships folks as well as our transportation and Grace Hobble staff is that the integrity of the trail and the future rail bed would be maintained in that regard.
Thank you, Scott. Councillor Gregg.
Thank you. Through you, Deputy Warden. Just a question about the financial component here, Scott. The report notes the approved 2025 budget. Is this one-time capital expected costs like going into the budget, or is this something that was and continues to be just out of the operational component of the budget? And then the last question is, what's the actual cost? Because the report doesn't note it.
Thank you, Scott. Scott.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Deputy Warden. Good questions, Councillor Gregg. And that piece is a little bit confusing. So prior to this project coming forward at this time, for the past few years, the planning department has put in our Trails and Forestry capital budget $25,000 each year for the purposes of surveying sections of the trail that are still in the land registry system and converting them to the land title system. And so there's sort of a helter-skelter patchwork of pieces of the CP Rail Trail throughout the 77-kilometer stretch that are still in the land registry system. And so the purpose was to tackle a small bit each year with that $25,000 to get that converted properly into the land title system. And so through this report and this process, we would simply be, as part of that 2025 allocation of $25,000, looking to prioritize those sections in Dundalk that need to be cleared in order to facilitate this. But the intent would be, beyond those monies that are already in the budget for that purpose, that the county isn't out of pocket any further expenses here with respect to these trail crossings. And so we'd be working with the township and the developer in that regard to make sure we have the proper crossing standards in terms of the signage and the gates and everything else. And quite frankly, this surveying work was work that we had already planned to do anyway, and had that capital money in the 2025 budget for that purpose.
Good. Thank you, Councillor Gregg. Councillor DeBreen.
Thank you, Deputy Warden, and through you, partially answered one of my questions through Councillor Gregg with regard to cost. So the north crossings to the school and to the subdivision development could, and maybe these are questions for me to ask at our lower tier when it comes to our county council on the 19th, but perhaps we can avoid that. Would that be a developer? We would go to the developer to maintain those crossings, those gates, that signage. For the lower southern crossings where you talk about lowering the trail, that doesn't mean that you're lowering it to go under the future Eco Parkway expansion, the truck bypass. It's just, I think you answered the question, Scott, that it's just a minor lowering of that trail. So I guess my main question is that Southgate assumes the maintenance and liability of those crossings going forward, and developer may be on the hook for some of the expense.
Yeah, so through you, Mr. Deputy Warden, thank you for your questions, Councillor DeBreen. So basically, when we have a new draft plan of subdivision, unless it's being built on an existing open and maintained road, it would be the developer's cost to build those roads to a township standard. And then you would have something in the subdivision agreement or something in your own policies that talk about maybe a warranty period or when the township would assume those roads. So for the roads in the north end of Dundalk as part of the Glen Phase 2 and 3, most likely it would be some arrangement between Flato and or the school board to build those roads up to a township standard. And at some point in the future, the township would come to assume those roads and maintain them in that regard. With respect to the lands in the south, you are correct. We're not talking about an underpass of the trail or anything else. My understanding is it's a slight lowering, which makes the crossings and the construction of that Eco Parkway expansion more feasible in that regard. With respect to the liability, certainly I don't want to do anything that's going to tread on quasi-legal advice. But my understanding is that, you know, it would be the road authority that has the liability for what happens on the road. The county maintains the liability for the trail itself. And you know, then if there's an incident that happens at the intersection, you know, then I guess we would work together in that regard to determine that. But generally speaking, what I understand is part of the reason for transferring these road allowances would be such that in the future the township would be the owner and maintainer of that whole section of road, so that we don't get into a sort of goofy scenario where you maintain the road on either side of the trail, but the county owns a 20-meter stretch of your road. So yeah, that's in a nutshell what my understanding is.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Barb. Any other questions, discussion? Not seeing any. Is anyone opposed to this? Not seeing any opposition. That is carried. Moving on to our final report today, in open session at least, and well, no, second last for Councillor Gregg's consent item. But this final report is regarding the Committee of the Whole and Council structure, which I'm sure will be a very brief discussion. Mover and seconder, please. Councillor Eccles, second by Councillor McKay. All right. I presume, Madam Clerk, is this your item? Yes, it is. So, Tara, please.
It is, thank you. This report comes to you today as a follow-up to the resolution that was passed at the January 23rd meeting. It requested a report on the structure of our Committee of the Whole meetings and committee meetings. The recommendation within the report is for information only today, as the report doesn't make any recommendations on changes to structure at this time. It simply provides information on the current system that we use and that we have been using since 2017, and as well as the previous standing committee structure that was in place immediately prior. Discussion at the January meeting appeared to focus primarily on the following issues or concerns. There was concern about a duplication of effort where membership would consist of all municipalities when Committee of the Whole already has representation from all member municipalities. When members are added to committees, cost isn't necessarily considered. There's a feeling that councillors are sometimes missing out on the information necessary to make decisions at county council under the current system, and decisions feel final by the time that they arrive at the county council table or have been made at the advisory committee level. There's also further discussion on standing committees and the opportunities they provided for more fulsome discussion. And they provided a certain amount of knowledge to the membership and their respective municipalities so that conversations didn't need to be revisited at the county council table. So Grey County has utilized a Committee of the Whole system since 2017, when it switched over from using standing committees prior to that time. As part of our Committee of the Whole system that we use currently, there are also various sub or advisory committees, currently 8, that make recommendations to council or Committee of the Whole for those bodies to make decisions on. So I will just share my screen briefly and just provide the overview of just to give you a visual on the calendar and what that looks like for us currently. So the one that you see in your report, and are you seeing a calendar right now?
Yep. Yep.
Okay, if I brought up something else. And the one that you see on the screen here shows the typical month in our current system. So you have council and committee of the whole happening twice a month on the second and fourth Thursday. And then there's usually between, say, 2 or 3 and 4 subcommittees or advisory committees taking place as well. That will vary month to month. Some will have more and some will have less, but generally that's kind of what we tend to go for. And those subcommittee meetings usually take about 2 to 3 hours each. So there's also no minimum or maximum number of committees that any member needs to sit on. So depending on membership of those committees, some members will be attending and some will not be. In terms of costs, councillors are paid a salary for council and committee of the whole meetings, and per diems are also paid for attendance at sub or advisory committee meetings that they attend. When we look back to the prior standing committee system, this calendar shows you the typical month. So there was one county council meeting held on the first Tuesday of each month, and then 4 or 5 standing committees meetings that varied in length. Most were about between 2 and 3 hours as well. All councillors were members of 2 standing committees, and then the warden sat on all 4 of those. So generally this meant 3 required meetings per month, plus subcommittees if that was applicable. So sometimes there were tourism advisory committee or the economic development advisory committee that also may have taken spots on this calendar as well. Councillors were paid a salary for council and standing committee attendance. Committee chairs received an additional per diem of $2,000 for that role. So salary covered 1 council meeting and then 2 standing committee meetings. And then your per diems were paid for those subcommittees. So there are some pros and cons that were noted in the report as well. Those were with our kind of hybrid system that we have at Grey County currently, we use committee of the whole, but we also do have a number of sub or advisory committees. So it is kind of a hybrid system, but it lists some pros and cons there for each system in its kind of true state. With committee of the whole, you have a system that is made up of membership of the whole council, and the results of the votes are taken or not final, but their recommendations that are forwarded on to county council for their final ratification. The pros are that is inclusive of all members of the assembly. It can lend itself to speedier decision making where all members are involved at the same time. Some kind of disadvantages, or it can be more time consuming with more members involved in the discussion, and it can be subject to some disengagement if members are not interested in kind of the wide breadth of topics that are discussed at the table. With standing committees, that consists of a smaller group of members forming a committee that has a specific focus. The advantages are that members can specialize in a certain area of focus, and they'll divide the workload up from it all falling to one body to have that more fulsome, in-depth discussion. So they can also have sometimes more opportunity to take the time that's maybe needed to conduct in-depth reviews of some of the issues. Some disadvantages are that they can experience some limited input because you're not getting the full perspectives of all membership. There's some element of duplication of effort if there's revisiting those issues again when they come to council following that committee discussion. As noted earlier, this report today is recommended to be received for information, as it doesn't evaluate which system would be better for Grey County, but it is within your purview as council to provide direction on a different outcome if you wish. To make any evaluations on what system would be better suited for Grey County, staff would just need some further information on what preferences you have as a council and what things you place most importance on. So whether that's cost or widespread representation, the speed of approvals, and dividing workload, etc., are all things and more that we would be looking for your feedback and kind of consensus on about what to prioritize. There are a few small changes we can take immediately, which will hopefully help to address some concerns raised about the information flow that happens between committees and council. So the first thing that we propose doing is just moving committee minutes to items for discussion from the consent agenda, and then we'll actively discuss the reports and the meeting that took place prior, and that will give hopefully more information to council and members of the public about why decisions and recommendations are being made to county council. We can also develop agendas by keeping similar topics or departments on the same agendas to provide a dedicated time and space to discuss like matters. And work is also planned in 2025 to update the council compensation bylaw just for additional clarity. In 2026, staff will be bringing forward a review of our existing committees and will provide recommendations on which ones are perhaps ready to be dissolved or can be merged together with other committees. So it was determined that a switch was needed to a different structure of standing committees. There are some challenges that we might expect, though nothing shouldn't be able to be addressed in one way or another. We just wanted to flag some things to be considered if council wanted to make a switch to a different structure. So over the past few years, we have been finding it increasingly difficult to schedule meetings just due to conflicts and everyone being quite busy and having very full calendars. So that's in the back of our minds where there's a possibility that we're not able to achieve quorum. So most of the time business can't carry on if you don't have a quorum of a committee or council present. There might need to be a delay implementing a switch just to ensure that meeting schedules don't conflict significantly with your local municipal meetings, or we'd be working with your member municipalities on a mutually agreeable schedule that would work for everyone. And we'd also be looking at building off the prior standing committee structure, but also possibly looking at recommending a slightly different setup than the one that many of you are familiar with from the past. We'd likely want to revisit the need to have the warden sit on all committees and then and look at the number of members sitting on each committee and representation as a whole. Regardless of the system that is in place, it's one of the key messages that we just like to note is that county council does retain that decision-making ability. No sub or advisory committees we have right now have any decision-making capabilities, and standing committees generally don't either unless they've been delegated that authority. So if there are recommendations coming through from our committees, they're not finalized until they're ratified by council and are up for discussion, debate, or further consideration until they're finalized. So that's all I have, but I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Very good. Thank you, Tara, for that report. Are there any questions or discussion? Councillor McKay.
Yes, personally, I kind of think the way it runs now is beneficial to all of us. As Tara said, it'd be quite confusing to start to try to change meeting dates when for the past while we know our set meetings, we know our set meetings at the township. I think it'd be a lot of work for the county to try to arrange all these meetings that would please everybody. So just my personal opinion, I think the way it is now, it's a good way it should stay. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Terry. Councillor Nielsen.
Thank you very much, Deputy Warden. Just a comment for myself when reading through the report. I do appreciate the item in there and what the clerk has brought up already this morning, the transparency of the discussion of decision making and the idea of presenting the minutes under items for discussion. I'm somewhat at a crossroads. If we put it under items for discussion, I do value the time and effort we put into a committee meeting and council meeting. And so rehashing the entire agenda might be challenging, but it is important that it's not just ourselves as the decision makers, but the residents of Grey County fully understand how we came to some of the decisions we did. I know that when reviewing the county's YouTube channel, the majority of our subcommittees are posted as full YouTube videos, so any council member can go back and rewatch the discussions and the decisions, and so could our residents. But not all of them are. I know economic and development is difficult because it changes the location, as well as the community services committee isn't posted in our YouTube channel. I'm just wondering is it easier for staff in the county through technology to try to make sure that all of our subcommittees are captured videos and discussions, that way anybody can review the decisions, or would it be easier for a rehash of the agenda through the items for discussion?
Tara?
Yes, thank you. And I think we certainly could look at changing or having more of the committee meetings in a electronic format or posted to YouTube and live stream. We do have some limits on location. We have the capabilities in council chambers, of course, but whether or not every committee meeting should or can be held there, it's certainly something that we can take a look at, and maybe changing some current processes we have related to where those committees actually happen, to try to have that available on our YouTube channel.
Thank you, Tara. Councillor Gregg.
Thank you, and through you, Deputy Warden, just a couple comments. I could be convinced to go either way here. I'm not opposed to one or the other, but I firmly believe that standing committees allow members much more opportunity to delve into information, to become more informed. There's a real benefit in that some members perform or excel more in a committee setting than they perhaps do as council as a whole. That's not something that's new or something that goes out. That's been fact for many years, and will continue. It's just the environment that individuals are provided to demonstrate their skill set. So there is a lot of value in the standing committees in terms of becoming more informed. I also think one of the benefits of standing committees is you actually create better politicians. Committee chairs become extremely strong, more valuable to the community, more well-informed, more able to speak to items to the community on behalf of committee and represent the commentary and concerns that were spoken of. So I think there's a real value to having that standing committee format. The committee of the whole is something that it's worked for us. I don't think it's an onerous time commitment to be able to make standing committees function. I think that's certainly achievable. But the committee of the wholes, I think we've only kind of came to this discussion because it's morphed in the last two months in terms of who we're appointing. And I think it's just important that going forward, we remember that we are here to represent the best interests of the Grey County taxpayer as a whole, not our lower tier municipalities. Just think of the ward system for municipalities that still execute it. Ward system members do not then get placed on every committee so that they're contributing. You have to entrust your colleagues that they are endeavoring to move the corporation, the municipality forward in the best interest of the upper tier in this case. So I think that's important. One thing that has worked very well, I think, under Mayor Boddy and Owen Sound is we structured our council meetings so that committee chairs report minutes to council, and they represent the conversations that were had and the concerns illustrated to both council but to the public. And I think there's a real value in having that opportunity. So I don't think that's a bad initiative at all if we incorporate more of that reporting back. So those are my comments. Thanks.
Thank you, Scott. Anyone else have any thoughts? Okay, the motion is to receive. Oh, Councillor Eccles, go ahead, please. And then Councillor Nielsen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess I'm probably one of the ones that really pushed this forward, and I don't. To Councillor McKay's comment about changing schedules and whatnot, over the last year, 2 years, we've put into place, I don't know how many, we're up to 8 standing committees and a committee of the whole and county council. I guess red tape is something that bothers me the most. Is my understanding was when we went away from committee of the whole back in 2000, or we went away from standing committees back in 2016-17, it was for committee of the whole to deal. And it was a whole day that transportation issues were, that was part of it. Planning issues. Yep. So everybody could deal with that and then take it to county council. And what I'm seeing is the committees have been struck. Now we've got 8 different committees out here going back and forth. Everything comes back to committee of the whole, then goes to county council. And the business community out here goes, time's money. And I realize this is politics. Time isn't a great thing. It certainly doesn't seem to be, because we've got these layers in place. And if we're going to continue on, I'm suggesting we get out of this. The committee reports come to council, and then council endorses or approves. But it's the red tape aspect that is bothering me as much as, committee of the whole, other than planning reports before lunch, is about the only thing that really comes into play. What we've delegated it all back to the committees. So one or the other. I believe that we've got to make a change, and I'm very much go back to making a committee structure. Tara put it out there. There's the calendar. There's this date, that date, this date, that date. We've had to make a pile of changes in all of our schedules, because it used to be Thursday, second Thursday, county council and committee of the whole. Fourth Thursday, county council and committee of the whole. And a little ad hoc committee here or there. And in 8 years, we've gone from pretty much no ad hoc committees, second and fourth Wednesdays, and now 8 different committees. Quite frankly, that's my point. It's one or the other. I don't think we can do a hybrid and be efficient and effective in governance.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Tara, any response there?
Excuse me, sorry. No, not at this time. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Councillor Nielsen.
Thank you very much, Deputy Warden. Again, the current motion is just to receive for information. Respecting what Councillor Eccles said, if we're wanting to give the direction for staff to move forward with some of the immediate ideas that they were presented, including bringing the minutes for items for discussion, just for clarity, is that going to have to be an amendment to the motion, or how would we proceed with carrying forward with some of those ideas?
I'm going to say that the staff have the leeway to do that now, but I'll direct your question to the clerk.
Sure, thank you. And my perspective is that that's something that staff will do in kind of our agenda design work as we put those things together. And they're certainly there for further discussion. We can just do that moving forward and see how it goes and if there's benefit received from doing that. So I would say no amendment required to the motion.
Thank you, Chair.
My comment, if I just a follow-up comment.
Yep.
My
Please.
comment would just be that perhaps a pilot test on the next 2 or 3 committee of the whole structures while we continue to discuss this might be beneficial, just to see if it is if it's successful and works, or if it's just more time consuming than necessary.
Thank you, sir. Councillor Body, please.
Thank you, Deputy Warden. In a few minutes, I'm going to be bringing or giving a notice of motion to add another ad hoc committee, which would look at shared services and things. But I thought I should raise that now, so everyone's not wondering where it came from in a few minutes when I raise that, and we'll get that up to 9 ad hoc committees, perhaps, for Councillor Eccles. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Well, to be completely fair, though, some of those 8 or 9 committees are legislated. The Committee of Management for Long-Term Care, the Accessibility Committee. I don't know if there's another one there or not, but nonetheless, they're not all ad hoc, to be fair. Any other discussion, questions? Councillor Nielsen.
Sorry, as I sit here and think through everything we're discussing, Deputy Warden, I think Councillor McKay made a very good point about changing during kind of midterm here. And I'm wondering, just from perspective of the clerk, if no changes are made in this current iteration of Grey County Council, would direction be needed to bring the same report and discussion further to the next term of County Council to facilitate that same conversation at the beginning of the term rather than halfway through the term? I think there are some points there where we're kind of working in a system, and whether or not County Council decides to make changes, it shouldn't preclude the next term and next iteration of County Council to have this discussion earlier on to see if there's a different method they want to have.
Tara.
Thank you. And I think over the last couple terms, what staff and the clerk's department have tried to do is early on in the term to bring forward a report of outlining all the things that seem to come up throughout the term, just as councils are kind of getting used to how systems are working and going, and then kind of midway through the term, a lot of the time the same concerns or issues keep coming up, and a suggestion to change to something different. And then by then, as you say, it's kind of too late to make any sweeping changes. So what we start to do is put together a report, bring it into council early on, and just give the new council a heads up about things that kind of recur and things to consider as we're moving through the term, about changes you may want to consider making throughout. And that's again, just an information report, but usually speaks to things like the duration of the term of the warden or direct election of the warden. Sometimes the ward system suggestion has come up as well, so that sometimes gets incorporated. So this is something that we can certainly add to that report. It's kind of a routine report that we bring forward every term.
Thank you, Tara. Councillor Carlton, please.
Thank you, Deputy Warden. Just 3 comments that I have. One being, I think, the necessity for all of these committees. I mean, some of them are ad hoc, they have a limited time, and then they're going to be finished doing what they were appointed to do. But it's the sheer volume of information that I think comes our way all the time now as councillors, both at the lower tier and the upper tier. And I somewhat reflect upon my father saying when he was on council, you could get there, read the report at council, and make your decisions. And I think there's so much more for us than that level of information now today. The other thing is, and Councillor Gregg alluded to this, the comfort level of everyone and the ability to have discussions seem to work better at that committee level than they do in front of all of council or committee of the whole. I like the idea of it coming back as topic of discussion at a council meeting and a report be given there. And I say that because we're now, especially since COVID, we are totally online. We have so many more residents watching us, and they are looking for that information. And these are people who wouldn't come to and sit in council chambers to get that information. But now that they have the ability to watch online, they're there. And I think the more information we can bring to them to keep our residents informed, the more important that is. So I'm in favor of the current structure. I know it seems like a lot, and I know I take on more meetings simply because my deputy mayor is still working full time and can't always make the time commitment to be here. So there's value in what we're doing now. I think we want to not lose sight of that. So thank you.
Thank you, Sue. Councillor Mackey.
Thank you, Deputy Warden. Certainly appreciate, Terry, you bringing back this report and outlining the pros and cons. Having been one of the members that have sat on both, I do believe the previous structure where we had the 4 standing committees is the best way to go. But upon reflection and thinking about what Councillor Boddy mentioned the last time we had this discussion, this is maybe not the appropriate time to make those changes. You know, we're over halfway through this term, and you know, as Councillor McKay mentioned, schedules are set, and it would take us a period of time to make this transition. There are some members of council right now, because of other commitments, don't have the same luxury of time to be able to dedicate themselves to certain committees. If we were to change to the old structure, it would be adding an additional day. Right now, members have a choice as to how many committees they're able or willing to sit on. There's no minimum requirement. So anyways, with that being said, I do think a new council should certainly look at how they want the structure to be, but it would be a lot of work for us to change it right now for a relatively short period of time. So those are my thoughts. Thanks.
Thank you, Scott. Councillor DeBreen.
Thank you, Deputy Warden. And through you, to Tara, thank you so much for the report and for the suggestions that perhaps the minutes of the meetings could be expanded upon during our committee of the whole structure. I am in favor of sticking with the committee of the whole structure, perhaps with more information for the public, for ourselves who aren't part of those those ad hoc committees, and appreciate that some of the 8 or 9 ad hoc committees will fall off. Others will be added as, you know, further consultation and direction or recommendations are sought. So I like the flexibility. I was always under the impression that our meeting, the Thursday, second Thursday and fourth Thursday, go to 4. We often are out before then, so we have a little bit more flexibility with our time reserved. It's a little bit more structured for us in scheduling our lower tier meetings and obligations. So I'm in favor of you know, monitoring and trying what our clerk has suggested. So given that, we can monitor and go forward. The regular meetings or the legislated meetings, we don't have a choice. So those are going to stay, and others will come on and fall off. So I'm in favor of staying with the current structure and look forward to more information and evaluating how that can benefit us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Not seeing any further hands up, I will call the question. The motion is to receive the report. Anyone opposed to receiving for information? I see no opposition, so that is carried. Thank you all. So that brings us back to consent item 6H, which is regarding a federal grant application for an active transportation fund. Motion to receive, I guess, is in order. If somebody is so inclined. Councillor Greg, you're moving to receive? Is there a seconder?
Actually, through you, Deputy Warden.
Yes.
Might I read the motion as I would like to move it? That report TRCW 0325 regarding the county's application to the Active Transportation Fund be received, and that an application for Gray Road 1 reconstruction project be submitted prior to council approval as per section 26.6B of the procedural bylaw in order to meet the February 26, 2025 deadline.
Okay, so that effectively removes consideration of Gray Road 17B in that application. Am I correct in that? Okay. Is there a seconder for that motion? Councillor Eccles has seconded the motion. Okay, Councillor Gregg, would you like to speak to it, please?
Certainly, I know staff are online and able to address concerns. Some of the concerns I had is the language about the municipal class environmental assessment on both. These are existing roads, and the projects before us are rehabilitating the roads. So I wonder why we have to encounter such additional costs as going through municipal class environmental assessments on what should be straightforward projects in our 10-year capital plan. We did have a delegation a couple months ago before council, very passionate and I think largely quite accurate about Gray Road 1 and the state of disrepair that it's in. I would note that the project starts at 23rd Street West in Owen Sound and goes northerly. This is a roadway that we are looking at exchanging or just downloading to the lower tier. But this is a roadway which right now the shoulders, the curbs are in poor shape as it leaves Owen Sound. When the county has commitments and responsibilities for urban roads, we need to have those at a level which is consistent with what the urban infrastructure around it should be. And right now that one is not, and it's certainly in poor shape, as we heard from the cyclist a couple months ago, as it goes northerly into Georgian Bluffs. Alternatively, Gray Road 17B, which, yes, I run through there, cycle it very, very rarely, as do most cyclists, because it is a redundant roadway. I understand the need for catch basin repair, that there needs to be slope rehabilitation in some parts of it. It's not in the best shape. But this project looks to expend a huge dollar value and then add a 3-meter multi-use pathway, as it states in the report, from Highway 21 to the intersection of essentially Nichols Gully, which is a 4-way stop, or 13th Street West. We have so many greater needs before us in Owen Sound, whether it's we've had a motion about Grey Gables expansion, we have individuals that we can't get into proper housing. That is one of our biggest challenges right in front of us. We have an aging population at home and an increasing paramedic need. And as a cyclist myself, this project does not serve the greater community in the same way as Gray Road 1. And there's no way I think council should be supportive of extending essentially urban infrastructure into a rural setting. I can tell you as a cyclist, going northerly from 17B on what's I think the Harold Sutherland Parkway is terrifying for one block. It has shoulders for some. It's terrifying with aggregate haulers coming behind you, and that can be verified by the cycling shop owner in the Springmount Industrial Park. Nobody likes it. There's an alternative. If we can improve Gray Road 1 going northerly, then it turns left, goes up to Ben Allen. We are achieving the same and actually a better route for cycling enthusiasts. And we do need to improve Nichols Gully through reconstruction and storm water catch basin repair. As part of that, we can improve the shoulders for the individuals that are pedestrian traffic that are going through there. the more occasional cyclist, but there is a myriad of alternatives available to those residents just beyond the limits of Owen Sound that are more preferred than the immense amount of expenditure in this application to further active transportation in that area. So I don't think council should be supportive of it. I think it's also a reason why it's a benefit. I think in next week, the Budget and Finance Committee is having the opportunity to look at items in the 10-year capital plan. And I think this demonstrates why that's important that committee and council has that opportunity and has that vision and line of sight into such a plan to arrange our priorities where they should be. But given the needs in front of our council and through the county, an application for Grey Road 17B for multi-use, I don't think is appropriate. And actually, if I could just comment one other, I'm just going to address one other item. If I go back to the master transportation plan, I'm going to read section 7.4.2.10, Grey Road 17B. Grey Road 17B has been recommended for transfer as it does not significantly contribute to the overall objectives of the county road network. Grey Road 17B offers redundant service when considering the proximity of Highway 21, and its role is further diminished by the recommended transfer of Grey Road 17 based on the criteria and the principal assessments between Grey Road 17A and Concession 20. That is directly from our master plan. And I'm just going to state that essentially this application is constructing a cycling route or a sidewalk to nowhere would be the appropriate terminology.
Thank you, sir. So we're going to give Grey Road 1 and 17 back to Georgian Bluffs. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I see your hand, Councillor Carlton, but I'm going to go to Trevor and Pat first for comments before I come back to you. So Trevor or Pat, you want to go first, or?
Yeah, I could make a comment. Yeah.
Sure.
Just, you know, going back to the master plan and maybe kind of cherry picking some comments out of there. There was a lot in that master plan that maybe was agreed to. A lot of it wasn't. You know, we really haven't gone back to some of the things that weren't adopted. So to say it's a redundant road, there's thousands and thousands of cars and lots of pedestrians and cyclists that would disagree with you. So I don't know what to say about that exactly, other than both these jobs in this are in our 10-year plan. The difference, I guess, on you know, Grey Road 1, especially the portion in town, say in Owen Sound, is there is other pedestrian accommodations there. There's a sidewalk to the town limit. Now, north of town, there'd be the paved shoulder, which we always intended to do, you know, in a window that was appropriate. 17B has no pedestrian accommodation. So it's not just about the cyclists, it's about all forms of active transportation. And that being said, even if we did our regular paved shoulder treatment, which we've done other places, everybody knows Nichols Gully has quite a bit of, you know, topography issues with, you know, a horizontal and a vertical curve that makes it, you know, difficult for cars to navigate. The only protection of a pedestrian walking behind a white line is the paint line, which is no protection at all. That was where we started the discussions, where we thought it'd be nice to get, as far as, and this is not just us throwing a carrot to help out Georgian Bluffs or anything. This is us trying to get the pedestrians off the road, out of our kind of wheelhouse. We know the pedestrian accommodations are for the municipalities. But in our mind, this was a project we wanted to do anyway, just to make a better pathway for active transportation. This was in our cycling and trails as being a route. But, you know, we thought just doing a regular old paved shoulder probably didn't suffice. So that's why 17B is in there. And I don't know if Trevor wanted to add something specific about the job or not. But actually, as far as the grant, I will mention one thing. This grant is peculiar in that it kind of, I'd be surprised if we got either one anyway, to be honest with you. It's very specific about the jobs not being a huge increase to the actual car user, the purpose of the grant is to basically get people off the road in their cars into some sort of active transportation. So we are tying it together with, a couple road jobs in our talks with, the people carrying out the grant. It almost seems like it's worded for more a standalone job for active transportation, which are very rare anyway, because you're probably not going to go and add a trail in the middle of nowhere without tying a road job in. So maybe I'll let Trevor go on about the job a little bit, but that's kind of my thoughts, that it is in the 10-year plan. 17B was a lot sooner in the 10-year plan than the other job. And if anything, it suits the grant a little better. So it's hard for us to leave that one out.
Okay. Trevor, do you want to add something? Please.
Sure. Yeah, just to speak to Grade Road 17B. Basically, actually, for both projects, they're both Schedule A projects as part of the municipal class EA process, which basically means they're pre-approved projects. Now, there is a caveat to that on Grade Road 17B. Unfortunately, at the north end, we only have a 15-meter right-of-way, which does limit us in terms of what we can construct in that location. So part of that process, we would be looking to potentially take some property to try to get more to a standardized right-of-way and then provide space for those facilities. What ends up happening there is if there does need to be an expropriation process, then we would need to move to a Schedule B EA, which would have a whole nother level of public interaction and have PICs and all those different elements of a more standard EA process. That being said, too, what we've noticed through just conversations with patrol staff, residents, and different people in the community is that there's definitely a sense of people using that for either walking to school, so kids, coming from the Georgian Bluffs kind of community to the north there down into the high school and the public schools. We also have some senior citizens who use some of the grocery stores and the pharmacy there. So depending, it's not a huge amount of pedestrian access, but there is pedestrians in there. And of course, being on the road is unsafe for us, especially considering you have hills on both sides. Cars tend to drive pretty fast there at the bottom of the hill, and there's not the greatest sight lines. So it does put pedestrians in a pretty unsafe situation. If there was a service or a trail that was off the road, that would provide us with a little more safety in that regard. What also happens is if we can put curb and gutter and restrict the width of the road, what that does is naturally slows vehicles down because they're more restricted than they would be if it was just a paved shoulder. And that curb and gutter with a narrow road tends to result in some slower speeds of drivers. So it does help in that regard as well.
Anything else, Trevor, or is that good for now?
That's
Okay.
good for now.
All right. Thank you, Trevor. Councillor Carlton, you're next.
Thank you. What I'd like to comment about is 17B. So that road has been completely redone in the last few years from the highway into the four-way stop. So it would be from the four-way stop through to the top of Alpha Street. The city redid Alpha Street last year and added an active transit trail. So this would link onto there. It is a road that is used by residents from the west side of Owen Sound out into Georgian Bluffs. Definitely students going into school, people going in to use the commercial spots on the west side of Owen Sound. And a lot of people coming in from the north on Highway 6 will take that to avoid the Spring Mount area and coming in through the Sunset Strip. So it is a key active transportation link. I would also comment that I think on some of these projects, we need to be looking not just at current, but looking at what that green and gray plan is for active transportation and looking out 20 years ahead. What are people going to be needing for roads that far out? I can agree with everything on the Grey Road 1. Getting the paved shoulders out there would be beneficial. There are some narrow sections on that road that do need to be widened. Without the paved shoulders, you're pushing the cyclists and walkers and runners out onto that road. The same happens to a greater extent on 17B when you come down across that bridge. There is no place for the pedestrian traffic or cyclists to get out of the way of vehicular traffic over that bridge. So I would hope that we can move ahead with keeping both roads in there to look at applying for the grant funding for both of them. So thank you.
Thank you, Sue. Just to be clear, the motion as it's proposed is just for Gray Road 1. So if there's a request to add 17B back in, we'd need an amendment at some point. Councillor DeBreen, please.
Thank you, Deputy Warden, and through you. From the report, thank you very much for the report. The environmental assessment is already underway for Gray Road 17B. We are making a conscious effort to improve upon or include the active transportation piece when rehabilitating a road, which I see that the road needs to be upgraded regardless of whether we add that active transportation link. And I'm all for applying, as Mr. Hoy has indicated, we may not get the funding regardless, but I would like to make an amendment to add back in 17B as proposed and recommended by staff, and see what happens. The province is taking out cycling lanes in the urban centers, so we'll see what happens.
Okay, so an amendment has been proposed to put 17B back in, essentially putting the resolution as it was in the package. Is there a seconder for that amendment? Councillor Carleton, thank you very much. So now we're talking about the amendment itself to put 17B back in. Any further discussion on that amendment? Councillor Body, I see your hand. Do you want to speak to that or the original motion? You speak to the amendment? Go ahead, please.
There we go. I'm trying. So it's going to be a question for Pat. There's only so many dollars that ever get given out in these grants, and that's why we don't often get them. But I've often wondered, do we water down our applications for something when we put in more than one, that we don't show that we're, I don't know, do we water that down? If you ask for too many, do they kind of clear them all out? Or if you really ask for the one you need, are we further ahead?
Pat?
Yeah, in this case, no, we're not really. Typically, we ask for what we, would need under the criteria of the grant. So this one is funny in that it kind of says, maybe Trevor would know better than I do, but it kind of says there's going to be ongoing grants relating to this active transportation fund. So you can apply for different things. It's not like it's only for 1 year. It's over a course of many years. But it seems like you can apply whenever you feel it's appropriate. So as it is, it's quite a long window to finish the work. I think it doesn't have to be done until the end of 29, whatever job you put in for or jobs. So, but we don't usually try to, it's hard for us to determine, what number you'd come up with to know that you're going to get it, right? So we just put in what seems appropriate for the job.
Thank you, Pat. Trevor, do you have anything to add to that?
The only thing I'd add is that as part of the grant, it does say that you can apply for any number of projects. So they do explicitly state in the grant that it could be a large number of projects if you so wish. But again, whether that dilutes the impact of your application, I wouldn't be able to say.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Nielsen.
Thank you very much. In reference to
we're discussing the amendment. Yep. Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
So adding back in 17B, my question for staff is, sometimes we may change the scope of a project so that it fits a grant application. My question is whether the grant was available or successful. Has the plan been to carry forward with the project as is being presented within the report?
I can speak to that.
Okay.
The scope for both of these projects would be the same whether we applied for the grant or not, at least in the current state. Again, that is subject to approval through the capital plan, and that. But again, those were the initial scopes that we've developed the projects on.
Thank you, Trevor. Councillor Eccles.
Thank you. There was one comment was we want to do this project. Is there a need to do this project? I guess that would be a question to Pat.
Okay, Pat.
Yes, I feel there is, like, how this project got developed was kind of a lot of discussions on the shortcoming of that road and the increased traffic, the increased pedestrians, just the issues with it that we needed. We felt we should address something. It is a tricky spot because there's not a ton of room in there, as everybody knows, but that's kind of where we started this well before the grant ever came along. But this is what we thought was the right solution.
So doing the stormwater, improving a bit of the road for vehicular traffic is going to cost us $1 million. It's going to be $2.5 million to put in the active transportation aspects of it. So I haven't seen that breakdown. And I guess that's what really concerns me. Is there other alternatives? Or is this the only way that Mr. and Mrs. Smith can walk from the north side at the four-way stop? And it is a four-way stop, so there are other roads there. This is the only way that they can do it. Is this the best active transportation route for us? Or is it just because it's 17B and it's very, and aesthetically, it's very great going down through there. Now, quite frankly, I have traveled it, not a lot. I have yet to see a pedestrian on that road, thankfully, because of the contours to that road. But I'm just, what is the cost of doing added in there? What's the breakdown? And is this the absolute best? Or working with the city of Owen Sound and the township of Georgian Bluffs and having that active trail come off of 17 and go further to the east. And that being the active trail and the safest spot to take traffic, whether it's to go to the high school or any other place.
Thank you, sir. Trevor?
I can speak to that through you, Deputy Warden. In terms of the cost, roughly, basically from the report, there's $473,000 that we attribute to the cost to do the active trail, where the entire project is estimated about $3.5 million. So again, that's about $3 million worth of road, storm sewer enhancements, more standardized projects. Now, what we do find is typically with urban and semi-urban type construction, a lot of our projects end up being in about $3 to $3.25 million per kilometer. This project's about 850 meters, so it does align in terms of what we would pay for a typical type construction in this environment. And given the topography, we suspect it will be somewhat in this range. Otherwise, in terms of the other active transportation routes or potential routes, due to the kind of valley, the Potawatomi River there's only a couple different crossing potential locations that residents could use. So 17B being one of the most direct to what we consider the west side of Owen Sound, where the most of the commercial and institutional facilities are. The other option is using 14th, I believe it's 14th Street, and I can't remember the Georgian Bluff side street, but the other hill there is a bridge at the bottom of that. Again, that is also a road that doesn't facilitate pedestrian movement very well either, because it is very narrow and hills on both sides, and again, pretty unsafe. Otherwise, it'd have to move more towards kind of the marina side of town to be able to get people into the city. And again, there's not as many commercial options as there might be at the west side of town.
Thank you, Trevor. Councillor Gregg.
Thank you. Just a couple points I would like to take issue with. That's the comment about walking to school. The bus companies for the schools now drives me nuts. We talk about climate change, but they bus kids at ridiculous minimum distances. So I'm going to challenge kids walking to school from that rural setting through Nichols Gully. And I have the ability, because I'm a Strava member, to be able to log into my Strava, and I can click on cycling heat maps. And the heat map data on Strava shows more activity on Young's Drive, which is a side street in Georgian Bluffs, than there is cyclists that go through Nichols Gully. That's my comment. It's entirely redundant to better alternatives. So that's just speaking to the amendment in place, and certainly couldn't support in the face of what are so many other heightened needs in the community. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Councillor Mackey.
Thanks, Warden. Certainly a good discussion. I am concerned about the cost and the real need for this. You know, I've heard Councillor Greg as a cyclist. I certainly appreciate, you know, his comments on where the cyclists are actually going, and that's not to say that Nichols Gully is not being used. I guess my question is for Pat, and back to the urban rural exchange, and what meets the criteria of a county road? Does this truly meet the criteria of what we need as county roads?
Okay, I'm going to rule that out of order for now, because we're talking about the amendment to put 17B back into the motion as originally proposed. And I'll come back to you, Councillor Mackey. Good question, but it's out of order for the discussion right now. Councillor Nielsen, have you got something regarding the amendment?
Yes, sir. If the amendment passes,
Please.
or if it doesn't pass, my question is whether or not it affects the capital improvement plan. So currently the amendment in and what we're discussing is strictly just an application for a grant. If this fails, the staff have already suggested that the plan is to carry forward with these kind of projects anyways. My question is whether or not the discussion today will affect or make changes to what staff are planning in the future. Currently, we're just talking about a grant application. If this is the theory we want to move forward anyways, apply for the grant so we have the potential of getting some offsetting costs.
Currently, we're talking about a grant application. I hope everybody heard that. Okay, Pat, please.
Yeah, I mean, to me, obviously, if you know, people don't want to apply for 17B as a grant as part of this, you know, 3-meter multi-use trail, clearly our scope would need to change in our 10-year capital as well then. Because obviously, if you want to keep on the same scope, you might as well apply for the grant. So I assume we'd be looking back at capital and figuring out if it's worth continuing with the project under the current scope or not.
Okay, thank you, Pat. Councillor Carlton.
Thank you. And I think I'm just saying what Director Hoy just said. If it's already in the scope of the project, I wonder why we wouldn't apply for a grant that would help offset the scope of that project. I think coming through there, we're going to have to do something to get, and there are cyclists and walkers on that section of road. It's a section I use quite frequently, actually. And so I see them maybe more than others would. I think at some point something has to happen there, and I don't see the problem in applying for that grant funding as a just-in-case scenario. So thank you.
Thank you, Sue. Councillor DeBreen.
Barring any other discussion, I'd like to call the question, Deputy Warden.
Okay, thank you very much. Unless there is any further discussion, I will call the question on the amendment to put 17B back on the table and essentially reconstruct the motion as it was presented in the package. Okay, I'm going to call the question. Is anyone opposed to the amendment? That is carried. So now we're back to the motion as it originally was proposed with 17B and Gray Road 1 in the proposal for application of the grant. Councillor Eccles.
I put forward an amendment then that if the grant application isn't successful for 17B, the project be taken out of the 10-year capital plan.
I think you're reaching on that one, because this is simply about applying for grant funding. Madam CAO, am I going the wrong direction here?
Thanks, Mr. Ward or Deputy Warden. I would have real concerns if we deviated from the process that we've had where 10-year capital projects are debated and discussed as part of building the annual budget. If we're going to start pulling things in and out of 10-year capital at, whatever time during the year, it's going to make it very, very difficult for staff to plan appropriately. And a lot of work could be spent doing designs and things like that that then wouldn't be coming to fruition. It would just make it very, very inefficient for us. So I hope that's not something that we would do. Thanks.
Okay, so that said, I'm going to say that amendment is out of order. Any other discussion on the original amendment, or the original motion rather, sorry. Okay, not seeing any, I'll call the question. Those opposed to the motion, please indicate. That is carried. Thank you all. Okay, now do we need another break, or are we good to keep, we're just down to the closed session. I am not sure how long that's going to take, but are we good to continue? Yeah, looks like it.
Mr. Warden.
Yes, please.
There is a very short presentation in other business, as well as the council body's notice of motion right at the end.
Yes. Yeah, no, I saw those. Thank you. Thank you. But I'll read the motion. The committee of the whole does now go into closed session pursuant to section 239(2) of the Municipal Act 2001 as amended to discuss A, litigation or potential litigation, including matters before administrative tribunals affecting the municipality or local board, specifically Georgian Bay Enclave, and B, advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose, specifically Georgian Bay Enclave. Is there a mover? Councillor DeBreen, second by Councillor Patterson. Thank you. Anyone opposed to going into closed session? Not seeing any, that carries. Scott, Councillor DeBreen, I see your hand up. Do you have a question?
I was just wondering, Deputy Warden, if when we go into closed session, so we've passed to go into closed session, could we have a 5-minute recess?
Okay, we did adopt the motion to go into closed session, so I see it is 12:46. So if we could return